is Eduardo Miranda. I'm a faculty member here in the Department of Civil and Environmental Engineering. Most of you know me. And we have today actually a combined Berkeley-Stanford presentation that you can see there in the slide. I think you know the three on top, but maybe most of you don't know Roberto over there. He's a geotechnical engineer who's about to finish his PhD at Berkeley with John Gray, and we got in contact just prior to heading over there, and we did some reconnaissance there, and he's going to cover this expert on. So with that, we're going to get started, and just before I get started, I would like to start with a little background and acknowledgments. So first, the Bloom Center, who sponsor our trip there in particular. Greg Derling was very supportive of this kind of task and sort of learning as much as possible from this kind of events. And then we teamed up down there with GEAR. Those of you who don't know, this group of technical engineers will do really top-notch reconnaissance after earthquakes all over the world. And then actually Professor John Gray sponsored partially Roberto Luque to this country. And the three professors that we met and were very helpful in Ecuador when we were there with logistics, information, contacts, and so on. And, with that, I also want to give an announcement. There's an event that an organization called Latinos, as you see over there, they're going to be putting together some Latin music right after this, and the proceeds goes to for Ecuador. So if you have time after this, I encourage you to go to Coho there and eat some Latin music for Ecuador. And with that, I just want to start, especially before we head and talk about Ecuador, I wanted to give you a little bit of background of what we're going to be talking about. And since most of us are either here or live here in the Bay Area, we're probably familiar with what happened in the Loma Prieta earthquake in October 17, 1989. And lots of bad things happened, lots of collapses, Cypress Street Viaduct, the Bay Bridge collapsed. All of those at about 100 kilometers away from the epicenter in a moderate magnitude event, and which basically had those sort of consequences that we've heard about. So big consequences, and there was just a big shake and awakening for the Bay Area. And now just sort of imagine this. And this is really what we're going to try to tell you in the next step. So just keep in mind that. Okay. So basically the earthquake was 7.8, so about 22 times more energy released than the Loma Prieta earthquake. That's the epicenter there, very close to Miranda. This is the intensity map, just scaled with the European intensity scale. And the events there you will hear, but they were originally basically in the subduction trench in the Pacific. So clearly close to that subduction is where the maximum intensities occur, and then diminishing as you move east. And this is the shake map from USGS, and that's the approximate rupture area. So very large rupture area, about 150 kilometers long. So keep that in mind, because we tend to refer to epicentral distance, and we know if you may be 150 kilometers from the epicenter and still be on top of the rupture. So you may see pretty good motion still very far from the epicenter. So other kind of measures of that. And you may have seen this from the news, just overall effects of the earthquake in terms of economic, well, there's no economic here, but the way actually fatalities were counted there, it's really when there was a body that was pulled out, identified, so I'm sure the real number is much higher than this. And then these were injured that were in and checked into a hospital, and the number of displaced residents are those that were sheltered in a public shelter after the earthquake. And in Latin America, it's not like the U.S., so if I were to lose my house, I would not go to the shelter. I would probably go to relative friends, and so the last resort would be to go to public shelter. So my estimate would be about 3 times that number, probably the people that lost their house or at least didn't have a place where to go after. So with that, I'll pass it on to Roberto.
Thank you. I'm going to talk first about the seismicity of Ecuador and the tectonics. So it's pretty easy, like you see in this picture, right? So first you have this is a divergent plate boundary, so cross is created here, and the Nazca plate is moving at around 60 millimeters per year towards the east. So there's Galapagos Island, it's a hot spot, which is creating island here, but it has been creating island for millions of years. So in the subduction zone, we have this Carnegie Ridge, which was created by the Galapagos hotspot, and it's pretty important in the subduction process. So the earthquake that happened right now was in the north subduction zone, and it is believed, the theory, that whenever it happens an earthquake in this zone and it propagates upward, it stops right here when the Carnegie Ridge is. So that's pretty much what we have. And also this subduction process has started a plate boundary, a transformed plate boundary within the contour, but that's not the subduction earthquake that we are there. So the other big earthquakes before this one was the big 1906 earthquake that ruptured approximately 500 kilometers along the coast, and then 3 earthquakes in 42, 58, and 79 that together, that's at least what they say in the literature, is that together they ruptured the same length as the 06. And then it became a small 1998 Bahia, which had a lot of damage in Bahia, and then now the Winston earthquake, which was here. So I just told you that the 42, 58, and 79 covered the 1906. That's what it was believed before 14. But then this guy says a potential for a magnitude 7.5 event in the next decades need to be considered there, as well as a potential tsunami. And this is what happened the earthquake. So, and the hazard analysis that we run in Ecuador is based on the subduction zone mainly, and also crustal faults in the continental crust. And the PEAs, for example, for the 475 return period, it's 0.71 in Manta, which is a city that is close to that suffered a lot of damage in the earthquake. Now, somebody's going to talk about the code, and the code only says 0.5 E for the 575-year return period. And the reason why is because they cap it at a maximum of 0.5. So whenever they get for the 10% in 50 years motion something greater than 0.5, they will just cap it there for economic reasons. And then the other thing is this sort of analysis, of hazard analysis, gives you this mean curve. And then there's a lot of variability around this. In here, for example, for the San Andreas fault, you probably have like 30 papers on that and the slipperies and everything. We don't have that kind of number of papers per fault to say what the slip rate is, what's the relative movement, what's the source characterization. So there's variability of 100 here, if not more.
Okay, I'll talk next. I'll do a summary about the type of constructions that you find in Ecuador. First, I'll start with the adobe structures with construction, which are generally located in the highlands. And these generally are just bricks, handmade, that are stick together with adobe. Next one this is what you find generally in the rural coastal areas of the country. It is basically a wood structure that has have walls that are made out of bamboo. This is a photo that Professor Miranda took in city of Guayaquil. These are the slums in Guayaquil. And these structures are generally made by foremen, people that have no engineering skills, but some experience in construction. And they start generally by having a 1 or 2 story dwellings, but as families get big, they tend to put 1 or 2 stories above them. This is the type of hotels that you find in the coast. They are some made out of wood, some others are made out of concrete. And these are patrimonial buildings, which are basically where the first settlements of the people where the first settlement took place in every city. These buildings are trying to be preserved, and they are about 100 years old. This is the type of dwelling, modern houses of middle-class families. They are concrete moment frames. They are designed by a structural engineer. And these are concrete moment frames, but in a bigger scale. And for this, we use the ACI code. And we also have the steel moment frames, but we don't have them as much as we have the concrete moment frames.
So I'm going to talk right now a little bit about the recorded ground motions in the 29 stations that we were provided with the records. So this is a courtesy of the Physical Institute from Ecuador. They do a great job of collecting. It was a pain to get them to give it to us because they were so busy and they have to go to some of the stations. And we finally have them. And they have been processed through the peer standard procedure. So, and I think they probably will be shared with peer and put it in the website. The largest recorded motion was in Pedernales, in one of the stations in Pedernales, 1.4 G in the east-west direction. You will see a record. So first thing I did is I plotted the stations in Google Maps and I classified them as greater than 0.3 and below 0.3 and 0.1, 0.1, 0.05 and below 0.05. And the intensity maps from USCS. And you can start seeing some things. For example, you see a lot of red to the south of the rupture, and you don't see that at the north. And there's not maybe the activity, I don't know what's the reason for that, but it's something that is worth looking at. The other thing is Guayaquil City is known by its soft deposits, so side effects are important. And you can see from both the intensity maps as well as the recorded motions that the PGA or the intensity is greater for the Guayaquil City in green, that it's on soft side, and the blue that is on rock side. Now you can see 8 motions that I selected for plotting this. So the first one is Pedernales, the 1.4 G. Actually, it's this spike here. You can mix it with the Chone one, but it's all over here. And then Pedernales, the other station, 1.06. Then I selected this AB21 station because it was similar distance than the Chone. The only difference is located at the north, and it was 0.2 versus 0.37, almost double. So we don't know why that happening. The other thing is Manta is 0.5, even though it's further away. And when we went to the station, it was on a cliff, so we may think that it's topographic effects there. And Puerto Viejo is 0.38. The important thing about these three is that you can see a frequency content. It's much higher frequency here in Manta and Puerto Viejo and Chone. So we thought maybe it's side effects, some type of solar effect that's going on there. And then the other one was Guayaquil as well. Like here is a road station, 1,000 meters per second shear wave velocity, and this is the record. And this is 5 times the PA 5 times this one here. It's 0.1 G, and it's in soft soil. The other thing is here is Pedernales, the time history. You can see it's relative short motion for a subduction earthquake because it's the distance is small. So it's in Guayaquil you have like 1 minute of shaking or more than 1 minute. Here it's the strong shaking is 40 seconds. And then you can see the motion, the spectra as values are much higher than the design value. Now what I did here is I compared the ground motion prediction equations to the stations to the recorded motions, and for every period for PEA 0.2, 1, and 3 seconds I did that comparison, and I also took the median of the recorded motions, which is the blue line. And the difference between the blue line and the solid red line is the event term, which is here. So the event term tells you at each period how far away are you from other earthquake recorded. So that comparison I made it. And here, for example, these are all the points that were based for the regression of the GMP. And you can see that it's from -1.2, -1.5 to 1.5 here. So we're on -0.5 in PEA. So on average, we are this earthquake had lower motions than the rest of the earthquakes. Now this is also a comparison with the same GMPE, but the spectral shape, and you can see like in Pedernales we are well above the median. It's almost 1 standard deviation above. And here in Manta we are well above the 1 standard deviation all over the range of periods, and that's what I was talking about, topographic effects. This confirmed that this may be a topographic effect or something atypical about the station. Then in Puerto Viejo there's a clear peak in 0.5 feet, but then after 1 second it's almost in the median. And then these three stations, Puerto Viejo, Manta, and Chone, had all a slight peak in 3 seconds. I don't know if that's directivity. I don't know what could be happening at 3 seconds, but that's an observation that I had. This one I put it next to Chone because they are similar distance, 25 to 34, but this was just smaller and this is located to the north. And then here is side effects as well, Guayaquil in road versus Guayaquil in soft soil. And then the comparison with the code. I select a bunch of them. I'm going to start with Pedernales. The code is at 1G in the high spectral values, and this went over 3. The same here. Manta was the one that was right then with the 475 here or with the code, I should say. But then the other ones all had more bonds in Chone, and I also put Guayaquil just to see a spectral shape. The codes all need to consider the side effects, so the spectral shape is fine for the pure motion, but the intensity wasn't as high. Now I'm going to talk about the technical part of the technical aspects of the presentation. So first, liquefaction that we saw in Manta. This is a sample of 90 centimeters. Nothing happened to a breach. The breach was on piles. And then I measured what the ground settled relative to the breach, because that's the settlement of the ground, and that's of interest, for example, for buildings. And it was like 20 centimeters of settlement. Then this is the Mejia breach. So you have, I'm going to show you 4 pictures here, 1, 2, 3, 4 of the abutments. The bridge is fine, and I'm sure some of you are going to talk about it, but the abutments did fail. So first, this is my dot for scale. It measures like 1.8 meters, so it's a lot of displacements. This river is displaced 2 meters laterally, so it basically changes the channel of flow. And this was the other abutment, the guardian failed, and the other abutment didn't, nothing happened. So it was the 3 abutments, these 3 abutments that failed for lateral spray and liquefaction. Then this is an interesting case in the sector of Turkey. Manta had a lot of damage. So this is before the earthquake. You can see it better here. It's probably 3-4 centimeters above this house. And then this is what happened in the earthquake. So what's going on here, and we saw a lot of this also in New Zealand, the foundation was, this house was 2 stories and then they added 1. And the foundation was probably 2 spread footings with tie beams, but the beams there are not reinforced, it's flat construction. But then it was a bearing capacity failure. The house didn't have much damage in the elements, but look at this, the soil within the house. Then this is the same thing. This is before the earthquake, and you can see how the sidewalls go up, like a bearing capacity type of failure, and the building punches into the ground. And here it's more clear. This is a slope sidewalk towards, it's sloping this way, and now look at this in the earthquake. So the whole house punched into the ground. Now this is a case, a slope stability case. I'm in the bridge right now, and I'm just looking at the slope before the earthquake here in Google Maps. And this slope goes the same way under the bridge, and there's 4 piles that we will see next that are within that slope. So this is the slope failure. Here was they sold cars here, so some cars almost went down, and then this is the failure of the slope itself. Here you can see this white is where all this was covered with soil, and the soil moved laterally towards the river. This is an interesting case. This is the abutment of the bridge Las Chacras. It's not well transited. It's a small town near there. And then you have, this is me, and this is probably 0.5 meter my leg, and this is probably 5 meters of the crack being there. This line in here goes with this line, and this line, these were all together, this all laterally spread that way, and punched into the ground too, because this was like 2 meters of sediment. And this crack well along the embankment, like 800 meters on one side, and like 900 meters in the other one. We took some shear wave measurements to see what material is there, and we know there's some clay size, some clay deposits of 7 meters deep, and the embankment was 4 or 5 meters deep. Now, for liquefaction, you always hear that, I don't know how much you know about liquefaction, but you will always hear that geologically in rivers or near sands, near beaches, you'll get more liquefaction. So I was in Puerto Viejo and I found a friend that wanted to visit a dam in a helicopter, and I went with him. But going from here to here, you have to go through this river. So I took some pictures of for liquefaction. Here you can see the fresh sand that came out of the sand. Here too, here is impressive the amount of sand that came, and here as well. And some cracks also. So if you, there was no structure nearby in this case, but whenever you're building any type of construction near the shore, you should be aware of this if you have liquefaction. This is a massive landslide near the highway E15. We took some drones, so we probably will have a final geometry later when they process that data. It's impressive. This was taken from a helicopter, and this was when I was working. And then this was impressive for us geotechs. We were driving along E15 towards the north, towards the epicenter, and I saw these slopes, and I was taking pictures of the slope. This is all the highway is full of these slopes. Whenever I was getting to the epicenter, I was expecting more damage, but nothing happened. So this is behaving really well. So we have to acknowledge the well behavior of some structures. Pedernales was 1.4 G, right? This is the most interesting stuff in terms of geotechnical engineering. Just they did backfill where there was a pipe, and that's it. Here you see this, nothing else in geotech part. This was also the sidewalk with a pipe that they filled poorly. Las Caras Bridge is important because it was a success in terms that it was designed for being operational after a big earthquake, and it was. But then I was surprised because I was involved in the project. I did my undergrad thesis on this building, and I also was involved as consultant for the pipe contractors. And I expected liquefaction a lot. This is they're going to talk about the structure, but it's mainly 9 or 8 piles, and then this kind of weird substructure 4 columns, and then they have seismic isolators here. They're going to talk about that. So I want to show you first one picture here from 1998. There was a big earthquake and it had liquefaction. And I took pictures here from liquefaction from this earthquake, and somebody else took pictures here from liquefaction from this earthquake. So what I want to say is in this part, there must have been liquefaction. We just cannot see it, and the bridge didn't say it. But it was in 1998. This was the picture I took from the helicopter. This was below the bridge in the abutment, in the San Vicente abutment, with drains. They put some drains for mitigating liquefaction and apparently it worked. And yeah, this is what I did in my undergrad thesis, and this is the factor of safety against liquefaction is well below 1 to 30 meters. So it's very, very loose sand that I don't know if we densified by putting the pile. I don't know if it's liquefied, but the pile was way below. So it's, but it didn't settle that much. I think in some piers it did settle a little bit. And then there's the dams. I went to visit 3 dams, a helicopter, and these 2 had nothing. And this one here had a little bit of slope failures in the right abutment. Here you can see this one is the same, and this one here is also the same. But it's minor compared to the shape. But fortunately it wasn't here because I've heard that it had some liquefaction there, some sort that is liquefied.
All right, this is a view of Ecuador. These are the cities that were mostly affected during the earthquake. You see the epicenter here in the north, and down to the south you see Pedernales and Cama and Alachis cities. We're going to cover all of them, but first I'm going to talk about Pedernales and Cama. Here we see a huge PEA in Pedernales, actually 1.4 Gs. If you remember, Professor Kirimiche knows you can actually calculate this probability of seeing this acceleration over here. It's just 30 kilometers away from the epicenter. This is how Pedernales looked like before the earthquake. There are a bunch of reinforced concrete buildings within field, masonry field. and also wooden constructions. Nevertheless, after the earthquake, what we found was something like this state, some critical blocks with kind of 30% of houses that collapsed. This is the stadium, it's actually a soccer stadium, and it was very important for the recovery of the city and for the emergency response. They took the stats here of what was going on during the earthquake, about injuries, about the damage in houses. Also, a lot of temporary facilities for hospitals were established here. It was used also as a helicopter, as a heliport, so it was very important for the emergency response. We can see here some international aid, the Red Cross from Colombia here, the Doctors Without Borders, and this bus also was helping in the attendance to injuries. Here I'm going to describe some damage to the infrastructure. This is a 5-story reinforced concrete building with infills. This is the look before the earthquake, and after the earthquake, it just lost the second floor. This was a collapse mechanism in the second floor. We can see a close view of that. We see the column over here. Let's look even closer, and we can see the rivers over here. The stirrups that are spaced kind of each 4 inches. This should be a bar number 3. The hook is still at 90 degrees, a bit different from the 135 of the ACI. This is another view of a sub-story collapse mechanism. This is Dr. Rojas, an expert of Ecuador, and he's also a funny guy. As that building, as that collapsed, we saw a bunch of them. This is a collection of some of the pictures we do. But it was interesting though, because even though we see this kind of damage in Pedernales, we saw a house like this. Like this was just, it was the neighbor of all the other houses. And we look at this house in very much detail, and we couldn't find any visible damage. Even the glazing is fairly okay. Actually, this house received a tag like the APC 20 requires. The occupancy was allowed in this building, and this tagging process occurred 3 days after the earthquake. Also, I want to cover a lot of failures in infill walls, so I want to give a quick overview of how they behave. This is a frame with the infill over here. If we impose certain lateral deformation, we're going to find certain compression in some diagonal, in this diagonal of the infill, but in the other diagonal we're going to find some tension. That's going to lead to this crack over here. But since earthquakes are cyclic, we're going to find that the same thing is going to happen to the other side. And if that is combined with certain movement of the infill in the other direction, we can lose certain part of the infill. That's going to be an out-of-plane failure. And this is what happened in reality. So our cartoon became real. And this happened over and over, even though this doesn't have the beam over here. It had this U kind of failure, the infill. This case was a small hotel. Actually, a kid was rescued from here. He didn't want to go to the beach with with his parents, but happily he was alive afterwards. And the thing is that if we observe the details of this building, you can see this laundry machine over here that is carrying some extra load. Maybe we think that might save the life of the child, and actually these kind of things can save your life. Another interesting example was this school, the Atahualpa school in Pedernales. It suffered some damage. We see here a back view of the school. If we look closely, well, the picture isn't that much, but we have some shear column behavior over, some short column behavior over here. Let's look closely to it. This is even a good detailing. River number 3, each 4 inches, but it still had this shear column behavior. The hooks here are 135 hooks. That's fairly okay. So this is another view of the same school. If we look to the joints, we see that due to the high shear in this part, there was some concrete spalling over here. And similarly, in the other, this is a view from the interior of the school. We can see here the shear failure of this column due to the short column behavior of this. This is a good detailing, nevertheless. And this image is also important because we see a lot of out-plane failure, and though this earthquake happened on a Saturday, if it were to happen during classes, this is very dangerous for kids studying here. So we see the table with a lot of debris here. And also, we see this picture over here that if we put certain circles over here, we can remember some slides of Professor Miranda, this collapse mechanism. And looking closely to it, we see a bunch of plastic hinges in the top and the bottom of the column. Looking at it, we can see the tension, the compression part and the tension part. The same thing in some other details of this plastic hinge over here. And well, that was Pedernales, one of the most damaged cities. And I'm going to cover now Hama, which is a place 45 miles away from the epicenter, 6K inhabitants here. This is a view of one of the schools. Here we have the interaction between the concrete column and the infill here. Apparently, the column was stronger than the infill, and the infill finally was kind of destroyed in the edge of this column over here. Sadly, in the back there was a collapse of the roof. Here it just fell down on the ladder here. And surprisingly, next to this school there was this precarious house over here. It actually has certain damage in the back, but other than that, it's fairly intact here. So it's pretty surprising to see, given the large PEAs that it made it through the earthquake. We can see some of the connections, and we can see that there is no nailing, so this was actually very surprising. And even though this is a light building, it took a lot of acceleration in the bottom. Same thing, no nailing. Some details of the slab over here, and in the back, the partial collapse of this slab over here. And we saw some interesting details over here of how is the connection. So you can see certain things sticking out of the column, and that's connecting to the beam over here. So we thought that this was maybe the classical way to do it also in Pedernales, and maybe this is the responsible of saving a lot of buildings like this. Now we see this is a very old building, maybe 80 years old or 50 years old building, and it's fairly okay, but it's astonishing to find that the neighbor over here has totally collapsed. It's very impressive what differences you can find in just a few meters away. And with this,
so this is a failure of a highway, and we actually saw several of this, but just to explain a little bit what happens with these. First, very large settlements in the vertical direction, but in addition, you have there you see Andres standing, and there's a slope failure that's happening here that produces that. And there's another example. This actually had a geomesh. So it's a modern highway that was recently built. President Correa had invested a lot in highways, and unfortunately, several of these suffer a lot of damage. So basically, you see this was essentially the drainage that used to be up there, and down there. And really what is happening is this elliptical surface. Those of you who took foundations, you may recall this. That's that displacement that you see here, but there's really a large body of earth that is failing along that elliptical surface. And this is a cross-section that is prepared just to illustrate a little bit of how this failing, how this large displacement is happening. Usually there's some sort of toe. In this case, it was mainly sort of in the jungle to the right. We saw, took some photos where there's some plants where you can see this. And this was a massive landslide. I mean, sometimes you see landslides after earthquakes. This is as big as it gets. Like half the mountain came down. And these are huge trucks. This is one of the larger Caterpillar front loaders there. They just look tiny compared to one of these. Fortunately, we were able to get around and continue our path to the north. We were stuck. And so that's good introduction to this bridge that Roberto had mentioned before. So it's a 2-kilometer long bridge along the Lachone River, and base isolated. So those of you in the tweets that we were talking about for a week and a half about base isolation. So if this bridge would have had a trouble, it would have cut all the western part of Ecuador now north to south. You would have not been able to get aid to the people other than by helicopter or by sea, which would have taken a long time. It was built by sort of the equivalent of the Army Corps of Engineers in Ecuador. That's a nice sculpture that they have there. And typically they have this array of 9 piles that Roberto talked about. And since I'm a structural engineer, I don't pay a lot of attention to that part of the stuff. Above 4 piers, and then above each one of those there's FPS, friction pendulum system. And I'll show you a few details of that. There you see typical sort of table-like 4 legs and isolators. That's a close-up view, so you get an idea there with a truck of the scale. And some details of each one of those supports, 4 legs and then 4 isolators. So there you see the isolators. And then the cross-section, type beams forming the superstructure. And these are some details of the FPS. These are second-generation FPS with a displacement capacity of 60 centimeters, 24 inches. And you basically have to concave surface and then a slider in between. And you can basically, the slider can touch one edge on one surface, and then the one on the other side, and you get the sum of that displacement and the displacement capacity. This is an example of one of those. Typically, you don't see the 2 surfaces. They're sealed with a rubber seal. And this is on the south end, the main seismic joint, separating the non-isolated portion from the isolated portion. There you see 2 vertical engineering doing the reconnaissance. And Raquel gave us those. We're proud to wear them behind. And there's Luis standing on the seismic joint on the south side of the bridge. And so we took a lot of photos. I won't bother with those, but a lot of evidence of the relative motion that took place. I'll show you a detail on the north end where we were able to measure. It's unfortunately not instrumented, and just interesting. My city is thinking about passing Castro Street. I live in Mountain View, passing Castro Street underneath the Caltrain tracks and along with Central. So one underpass, they're thinking about spending $120 million. This bridge costs $100. So just to give you an idea of good engineers in Ecuador can do with. This bridge here in the U.S. will cost 5 or 6 times as much at least. And so this is the cover for the joint there. And that's just a close-up view of how that cover was displaced, 20 centimeters. And then it was displaced and buckled there, so we just documented some of that. And that's sort of a record. And the other thing, we put our cameras inside of that and we were able to document with scratching of the cover against these guys. And so the bridge is 2 kilometers long, but has this every 4 segments. These are continuous, and then there's some rather small joints there that I have no idea what was the thinking of this bridge. I think they were primarily aimed at thermal. They're rather small for seismic joints, 4 inches, as I'll show you. And so I'll show you some details of those examples of sort of thermal seismic joints. But this is sort of, the lesson. Sometimes we as engineers, we put together mathematical models and we have some sort of idea how the structure will behave. Imagine the engineer thinking of a uniform input on each one of these supports, but in reality you can have different motions and then they're not necessarily going to move the same. Schematically they may look the same, but so they may end up moving differently. And that's what happens. We documented a lot of pounding on these locations. And the other thing was kind of interesting, with a lot of thought that goes into doing a seismically isolated bridge and a lot of cost on buying these things. Well, so the message didn't go to the electricians. So the illumination, which is very nice in the evening in the bridge, it just passed. They had this PVC piping through the seismic joints. Of course, the earthquake took care of that. But that allows us to also measure some of the relative displacement that took place there. So in this case, it was failed in tension, And then there was some pounding there, so we pull out our crack meters and we were able to measure 4.5 centimeters of relative displacement there. The other thing we observed there, some of the seals of the isolators failed. And these are pretty much how they're done everywhere in the world, but now we know that they work. So there's a small lesson there, probably the company that manufactures those needs to think about a better way of doing that. If you think about it, there's a few of these structures that have this kind of hardware, but very few of these that have gone through a big earthquake. So it's very important to understand and document what happens in this. We documented a small residual displacement, as you see there. This is sort of just looking down the bridge. And the other thing that I didn't quite understand, I was telling my party over here, that if I was designing this, I always tell the students in class, you have a system in series, it's as strong as your weakest link. So if I'm going to do, why would I do a portion of the bridge that is fixed based if 90% of the space is area? But that's what happened. The south end is fixed based, and I would have isolated the whole thing. These are some details of that. Sort of like 101 type of bridges with after beams that get supported on the supports, and fortunately nothing happened. But there was some cracks there that were not terribly critical for the structure. But if it falls off, I mean, in Chile, it took 50 photos of those things on the ground. Unfortunately, no one's ever seen it. So we'll pass it on to Teresa.
Okay, the next city we're going to talk about is Bahia de Caracas. This was the city that had the last major earthquake in Ecuador, a 7.2 earthquake in the year 1998. There was not so much damage because the earthquake was very deep. It was like about 70 kilometers deep. The city is about 120 kilometers away. This is, so you can get a better view of how Bahia de Caracas is. It's a very touristic place. I'm showing you here a museum which had some structural and non-structural damage. You see the structural damage right now in one column, some non-structural damage there. That I'm just showing you one of the parts of it. It had a lot of non-structural damage. This is a fire station. As you know, a fire station is an essential structure, so they shouldn't have any damage after an earthquake. It had some non-structural damage here in this wall, and actually this caused that this sliding door here didn't open. So in the end they couldn't use this station for emergencies. But what they did is that in front of the street they had a temporary station in which they had all the equipment. They had the radios, they had power stations, so they were still assisting in the emergencies in the city. Next we're going to see the buildings in the city. Taking a closer view of this, this is what is called coupling girder failure. This is something not new. This has happened before, for example, in the Alaska earthquake, the Good Friday earthquake in 1964. And about 50 years ago, we still see the same. We still don't learn from the mistakes. This was taken by Professor right there. This is the non-structural damage in the same building. This is another building. If we take a closer view, we'll see glasses, windows broken, non-structural damage. And again, another building, we see glass windows broken, a lot of glazing again broken. This another building in which, if we saw from the first story, we see that this is what is called punching shear failure, which is a very bad failure in a building. This next one here had again a lot of non-structural damage, and if we see from below the building again, another building, they had the same punching shear failure, which as I told you is bad, very bad for a structure. This is that and also from below you see all the broken glasses that have fall off from the building. The next city is Puerto Viejo. This city is the capital of the province of Manabí. This is it has the biggest population of the province, which is about 280,000 inhabitants. It's located 165 kilometers away from the epicenter and had a PGA of 0.38 Gs. This is the city where I was born, actually. This is the Technical University of Manabí. I'm showing you this building because, as you can see, it has no damage. But right in front of it, actually just some meters away, you see this building. which had several non-structural damage. You also can see Professor Miranda taking a picture from the cracks inside the building. Imagine if it had happened during a weekday, like from Monday to Friday. Imagine if they had classes at that time. It would have maybe killed somebody. Then here you will see a column that failed, had shear failure. If we take a closer view to it, we see that the detailing is well done and it complies with the code. It has this diamond configuration. This is, like Luis explained before, out of plane failure, it loses capacity in one side and then goes on the other side and it just collapses. Here you can see how far the walls came down, and if somebody had been walking around there, it had killed them. Then we went to downtown of the city of Puerto Viejo, and look at this building here. This is a bank. This is after the earthquake, 0.3 inch. We think that the building started collapsing from this point here. We see closer, and if we see closer again, this is what you see. The failure started as a shear failure, and then it lost its carrying capacity, and after that it just collapsed. What you're seeing here. Did you see all the stirrups open, all the rebar bent? This is a back view of the same building. If we take a closer view again, we see that actually the rebar is well done. It complies with the codes. Number 3 rebar, 4 inches separation. The same with the joint here. This is another building before. This is the after, sub-story. And as you can see here, there's 2 stories there. And they have these long columns, and they have no bracing between the columns. So this made it very soft, and that's why you're seeing now. This is a hospital. Sorry, this is a hotel. Before, this is the after. From that, you cannot determine what was the cause of failure. The building that is next to it is a place where women give birth, and that's actually the place where I was born. If we take a closer view to one of the columns where you can see the rebar, it again complies with the code, with the ACI code, and they have the 135-degree look there. This is interesting because next to the wood structure, you can see this concrete structure that it's completely collapsed. If we take a closer view to this wood structure, you can see this wall. This is actually earth. Indeed, as you know, earth is very heavy, and they tend to be more heavy. The heavier the structure tends to have higher probability of collapse. If we see closer, again, this is another structure that didn't collapse. It had earth in the walls. Again, and this one is in the slab. Even though the slab collapsed, you see the beam here that is all moth eating, and still it persisted all the loads from the earthquake. This one, apartment structure, this is what happened after the earthquake. The reason why this structure is like this is because it's a flat slab system. As some people might know here, flat slab systems don't behave well after an earthquake. How can you know this is a flat slab system? Because there are no beams between the columns. This is not good for resist surface. Again, another building with very long columns, no bracing between the columns. This is what happened after the earthquake. A bank, it failed in this column here, so it went to one side. This building here, they have like a restaurant here where they sell like empanadas or something, and my family was, before they were eating here like half an hour before. This is what happened after the earthquake. Thank God that they're still alive. I'm going to go ahead and show you a building from Guayaquil. Look at that big cantilever, and it collapsed after the earthquake. But it's interesting because look at this building in Puerto Viejo. It didn't collapse. It had some minor damage, but it's still fine. And in front of that building, there's this other building. But if we take a closer view of this, it just has beams in one side and it doesn't have it the other side. It still had it didn't collapse. We went to the facilities of Eco 9/11, which is like the 9/11 you have here in the US, same thing. And we see some damage here. And this damage here, it's not because of a structural thing, it's just because of Apparently, the constructor or the architect didn't know that there was a seismic trend between the buildings, so that's why it caused that. We also went inside the building and we saw the machine rooms for the elevators. And generally, you sometimes expect to see some damage here, but we didn't see any damage, and the reason of that was because it was well anchored to the ground, to the floor. And we also see that from inside the elevators, the counterweight, and it got derailed. It is very common that the elevators derail after an earthquake like this.
So now, moving along, I'm going to describe the city of Manta, which is the largest that we visit, other than that, the largest city, Guayaquil. Capital is Quito, which is here. This is a large city, relatively close to the epicenter. It's all about half a G. And one of the most important sites we visited was the port of Manta. Ecuador has 3 large ports. It's one of the important ones in terms of imports of cars and many other goods and kinds of ships that are not able to go to Guayaquil. They get here. And then there's a lot of exports of shrimp, fish, tuna, big producers of tuna in Ecuador. And it has 3 wharfs, breakwater over there, and then the marginal wharf. And I'll show you a little bit of what happened on each one of these structures. Just a few photos I downloaded from the internet. You get an idea of the size of this. And first, this is one of the yards, massive liquefaction, and it was so large that I could see it. We were on the plane, we were looking at some images that the Europeans took from satellites. And from satellite images, I could see the amount of sand that would come out on these yards. I couldn't see that these were cars, but I could see all the liquefaction. The other thing that it's interesting here, usually when you have fines and some plasticity in there, it's harder to liquefy it. And as you can see there, there's quite a bit of fines and plasticity there. There's still massive liquefaction, caused massive settlements, and lots of ground deformation, as you can see here, and a little ramp for lowering fishing boats, essentially totally destroyed. And this is in the port. The building, this little building was sort of okay, but this main axis basically settled, as you see there, 18 inches. Massive deformation. And it was actually retrofitted. These are the piles. It was retrofitted by a U.S. firm that does international work on ports, one of the best firms in the world. They've done work here in Oakland, in Los Angeles, most of the major ports in the world. And some of these things, don't ask me why, but they got jacket up to this height, and they left a little guy up there. And lots of plastic hinges and shear failures. Just that you get a size of these wharfs. And this is one of the international ones. These are massive. It's 900 piles. So we were just there a few hours. But imagine that we were tasked to inspect each one of the 4 faces of the 900 piles. Somebody's doing it as we speak. The other thing that is sort of interesting is the way we design these things is typical structural engineering approach, right? We simplify the problem and we say, okay, these guys take the vertical load and the battered piles will take the lateral load. And that was the kind of thinking that went on with this American engineers. They retrofit the battered piles, and in particular the ones on this side that figured these needed to be retrofitted. And here comes the earthquake that proves it's wrong. It doesn't work like that. Vertical gets trashed. And battered piles, again, this is a standard way of doing wharfs all over the world. You see there's lots of problems. So hopefully this is not pulling up and it's good. But it didn't look too different after one credit. I don't specialize in ports, but just in my life I've seen those kind of failures 5 or 6 times. We took a boat tour on under these guys, and there you see the central portion of the wharfs. They're the vertical ones, and then the battered ones are on the brim and incline piles. So those are sort of like the earthquake comes and asks you which ones should I impose lateral deformations and which ones not. And here comes the earthquake and crashes everything. It was actually the vertical capacity of the wharf was increased. That was one of the main tasks that this firm was tasked to do. They added some vertical piles, and in those cases they connected that with this massive corbels. This is about 60 inches by 40 inches, so plenty of capacity. It comes here quick and teaches us a lesson. This is the marginal wharf. It's an open wharf, and I'll show you from the top. Look kind of suspicious, as you can see there. I'll show you a close-up view. So they didn't design it that way. And this was the wharf, and then the earth structure next to it settled. Big step there. Documenting 48 centimeters settlement. And then, interestingly, there were portions there. You see the vertical piles taking the gravity, the battered piles supposedly taking the seismic. Pretty good shape. But then in certain portions, this is 800 meters long. This is sort of like astral type of precast elements for the superstructure. And then you start zooming in and start looking at something suspicious. And that pile used to be connected to that. But in some cases, it's more than 1 meter away. And precast piles, there you see the half-inch stress and strands, 270K size strands, mild steel, stirrups, and just took several photos of each one. Many gigabytes of photos. Just show those. The other thing that it's interesting here is you say, where is the axial load going? What is the axial load that each one of these piles is taking? And then this one is broken, that one is broken, the next one is broken. Like, where is the axial load going? Right. And there you see how generous the beam is. It's just deflecting a whole bunch, but it's able to distribute the load. We're able to walk. So for those of my earthquake resistant design class, this is something that I'll ask you to find. So think about this. So short column, right? You build some stairs, one of these piles. The earthquake recognizes that was not in your computer model. So the question is, did this failure happen when the earthquake was going to the left or going to the right? Just think about it. You still have another week. Okay, so this is just walking along. Lots of deformation, lateral spreading, liquefaction. There's Professor Rojas standing there. And then this is the breakwater, a lot of lateral spreading again there. And major cracks. This is the international airport. Actually, for some reason, but this earthquake, we managed to beat here. We were there before here, and we were even before the U.S. Army. And this is what happened to the control tower. And now the U.S. Army actually has a portable station that they brought in, and they're operating the airport from there. There were 2 operators up there, and one of them escaped. And then the main terminal, mainly non-structural ceilings on the perimeter, as we've seen many times. VIP room, if you want to visit it. This is sort of the equivalent of the TSA. You can see where just some trouble was here at TSA in the US. And then this is sometimes we call this short column, induced short columns. We sometimes think that short columns just happen when there's a partial height infill, but sometimes what happens is you crush the infill, and then you create sort of like an induced short column that happens afterwards. I show you from the outside, and then you get failure and you start losing vertical carrying capacity. Again, inside the terminal. The earthquake was on Saturday in the evening, 6:58. And with that sort of good timing for thinking about the time, this was a hospital in Manta So the visit time would just finish at 6:30. And if you're in Latin America, people will leave at 6:30, right? So people are around with relatives and so on. So, but most of them had been out, and basically patient nurses and doctors were inside. I'll just go kind of quickly, but as I'm showing these photographs, I just want you to think about this. Imagine you're a doctor, a patient, or a nurse, or staff who was in there. And just kind of imagine what's going through. That was the emergency exit, so people were supposed to go down the stairs, would go behind this, and then come out of that stair. All the infills there. Here's one of those ones. Lots of problems with infills. These were never seen something like this. This would literally split the wall. And you can see what Luis described, this in-plane failures and reminiscence of failure. And when I was there, sort of, I don't know, professor, right? So I have students next to me, so I'm lecturing, asking them, so what happened first? This crack or the outside of the floor? So questions like that. And, so just imagine this pile was somewhere up there. Look at the beds. That's your corridor, your way to the exit. And then that happens 2 levels up. Same hospitals. I'm a big fan of models and computer models and estimation of drift and acceleration and these economic variables. These are the stairs. I'll show you now what goes along in terms of structural damage. And I was looking for structural damage in the structure. I'll show you the most that I can see. Nice plastic engineered beam, little ship cracks, beam column joints. And one of the things I do is develop fragility functions, but then you use them in reverse. And from this absurd damage, you can figure out what was the drift in this hospital, because it was not understood. My guess, about 1%. And just terrifying to think about 1%, what it did to that non-structural components, 1%. This is university. Since we're on a campus, I'll show you another campus. And just a few details, again, a lot of infill. This was the office of the president of the university. And you think about computer models and open seats and so on, try to predict what that guy really felt. Another thing, this, don't ask me why, but I saw a number of buildings like that with a joint right there. We have here one designed by a very famous architect and engineering firm here on campus. Clark Center has the seismic joint right there, which is fortunately a little bit bigger than this one. Couldn't see much of it that way. That could be in the final too. This failure happened when it was going to the right or to the left. Next time you go to the movies, you go to the box office, think about this photo. And then this nicely illustrates what Luis was talking about, how this little infills and why earthquakes like to put X's. Sometimes professors, after finals and midterms, they put X's. This is the final test. This is a really fancy building in downtown Miranda. Had a couple of bridges between the 2 towers. And they had a fairly good detail seismic joints. And zoom in a little more. So they clearly left a gap there, and they had a number of things there that's in the upper level. relatively generous gap, obviously not enough as you can see. But what do you think it's wrong with this image? I mean, that's typically what happens. You think of structural engineers, and then somebody else takes care of the non-structural components. And what was the pattern on the glazing there relative to the job? Yeah. You know, things like this, ticking bomb waiting to go off, is not enough. And again, just a few more examples. Lots of soft-story collapses in Miranda, very tragic. That was the column of the soft story. But it really, you know, starts just like those simplified plastic analysis. Those of you taking that class, we just did this in the back of the window calculation. 5% even, like we computed the real details. To compute what was the lateral force required to produce that collapse. And then, you know, again, tricky things where you have full infills, but then you fail in compression, and then they end up producing shear failures in the columns. A few on bridges, similar failures to the one that I showed you in the Caras bridge. Again, maybe not a big deal from a structural perspective. There's a lot of concrete up there. When it falls off, that was the bike path. So that's why I tell the students, where the hell lots, essentially all of them are like that. More photographs. And then, you know, the puzzling things. There's not been a single earthquake that I've done some reconnaissance in which what you actually see is that earthquakes are very picky. It's like, you know, I'm going to break you, and then it's going to skip 2 more, and then I fail this one, skip 3, and I go to the other one. These were 2 hotels, side by side, very similar. You know, you could basically have all the problems that you could think of. But this one, all the glazing is there, essentially no cracks. The one across the street looked like that. And the one next to it looked like that. Sometimes, you know, in these design documents, we compute rotation capacities of elements, and we say, oh, non-ductile reinforced concrete, that only goes to maybe 2 or 3%. Then you look at photos and say, oh, yeah, I think that goes to 20%, or maybe 30%. So finally, what do you keep? Largest city.
Yeah, finally, the last city. So this city is the biggest city in the country in extension and population. It has 2.3 million inhabitants, located 167 kilometers away from the epicenter. And the PGA, is very small. But since this city has very soft soil, the ground motion can amplify. So I'm showing you here, this is a bridge, this is a bridge that connects the northern and the southern part of the city. And this is how it looks after the airport. You can see that the pre-stress beam is fine, but if we take a closer view to the piers, there's where the collapse happened. These are the piers that are next to the ones that you just saw, and they failed, they had shear failure. And the reason why they failed is because the design was not well done. This is a bridge 2 bridges that are about 0.3 miles away from the one that we just saw, and they also had failure. They had big cracks along the columns of the piers. And here's the explanation. So the lateral force comes, and there's compression because of that, and because of the load of the deck, and it forms a strut which makes perpendicular field of tension, and after that the cracks form. We also visited some hospitals in Guayaquil. This was for us the most interesting one. So this is Solca, and this treats patients with cancer. This is the view of the building. This building had some structural and non-structural damage, especially more structural, a lot of that. Cracks here. This is an emergency exit, which is structures for emergencies, but this is how it looked like after the earthquake. And I don't know if they look familiar to you, but they start the same type of emergency doors that we have in the US. So hopefully that doesn't happen as well. The reason why this building had this behavior, this bad behavior, non-structural damage, is because this is a flat slab system. As I said before in the building that I showed in Puerto Viejo, flat slab systems tend to be very, they displace a lot, they don't have good behavior. And how do you know, and the most typical behavior, failure that this building has are the punch and shear failure. How do you know that? Because you can see cracks around the columns that look like this one. Actually, we use a crack gauge to measure that, 0.025 inches. There was a building that was constructed above a first floor in that next to this structure that was just showing you. They are using this type of isolated, rubber bearing isolated for the television. You can see more of that here. So we don't have any isolated building there. This might actually be the first one to have that. So, and last, we went to one of the most modern part of the city, which is called Puerto Santana. This is actually the tallest building of the country in Guayaquil, and it is located. It is next to a parking structure. From there, we thought that there was no damage, but actually Professor Miranda had a very sophisticated camera and he started zooming and looking all around it, and he found some damage. And you cannot see it from there, but if we go even closer to that, there was pounding in between the two buildings. Even though it was not like very severe, but it shouldn't happen. Imagine that this is not a big earthquake, and they had damage, so it has to be foreseen in the design so that these buildings
So just to wrap up, some very brief final thoughts of this witness, 300 slides. So the first one is that this earthquake continues to teach us a number of lessons. We've made huge progress over the last 50 years, and some of us devoted our lives to study this thing. And we're just still scratching our heads. There are a lot of things that we don't understand. We cannot predict what we observe. We need to continue working on several things. And the other thing that strikes is that, yes, you see a lot of failures, but then you say, well, these are bigger emotions, right? I mean, they're epsilons of 2, 3 times above the code, spectral accelerations of 3G, and there are structures that are intact. So they're good lessons to learn. It's like, what's good and special about those that we need to learn for the motives. And the other one is just we need to remain humble. I always tell this to the students, and I will continue to that, because that's just my lessons when I go up. This is my lesson. How much do I know? And then I come back and still have something. I still don't figure this. So I would just wrap up by saying that even in this country, probably the richest country at least for a few more years in the world, perhaps the state that it's more prepared for earthquakes. But there are good lessons, and sometimes there's small lessons like learning to put the seals better. But notice that lock right there on the door that we're in. So, that's exactly, this is my classroom today. And that's exactly the kind of locks that we saw. And they jammed at 1% grip. And I challenge you to look at ATC 58, state-of-the-art stuff in terms of fragility. Look at the fragilities for doors, for emergency doors, for SPC 3, Stanford technology. You will find nothing there. And if you walk a few feet, think about what you observe. And it's easy to say, oh yes, this had a soft story, these guys didn't know how to do this. But our trouble is to actually find these failures before they come. And I challenge you to just walk around and try to identify these failures. This year, many of you know that I'm crazy about something, right? This year, the winner of the English Premier League was placed there, and nobody would have bet. I mean, certainly I would have never bet for that team with the UPL. Well, you wouldn't see me betting on this being called as they doing it on the Saturday night. But it's there. It's full of patients and nurses. And we just need to think in advance and say, how is that joint going to do in a big earthquake? Is there enough mechanism, paths to really work? Maybe I'm wrong, just like I was wrong with the EPL. Or I pray that I'm wrong. Questions? Yes.
How many failures in the concrete structures are the ones that were actually designed with ACI? My understanding is it wasn't implemented until the year 2000.
No, actually, it's been there for a long, long time. I mean, if you go to Latin America, most codes are some sort of copy of U.S. codes. And actually, very good engineers from Latin America are part of ACI 318. So it's just the implementation sometimes is not there. But sometimes it's really hard. I mean, I documented a lot of these cases. We like to be simple, right? And we like to think that if you bend the stirrups at 135 degrees and you put the cross tie, then it's going to take care. But when you go to this earthquake, you find that even columns are very well detailed. It's still smashed out. So it's tough.
Thinking about the images from one of the hospitals that was damaged, non-structural damage, but no structural damage, not much structural damage. Were there any deaths solely attributed to non-structural damage? And I guess I'm not thinking so much of unreinforced masonry falling, but more things falling from the ceilings and things like that.
So we were told that only one person died. But having walked through that, I think they just telling the truth. I mean, the number of beds that I captured in the chance of wars, just all sorts of stuff. And it's
Just to go back to the concrete, like shear failure of the columns, so is it really just kind of either just like large magnitudes and it's going to happen, or is it more, you know, capping, like what PGAs are using for that, and then economically how much you can design, or is it the concrete itself? Like, is the material used for concrete?
Well, I think that it's really a combination of things. I mean, this capping is the same thing that we do here in California. Right? I mean, we do probabilistic seismic hazard analysis, but then when it comes to near fault, we say, well, we're going to do capping with some determinants. In my lifetime, I've seen spectral ordinates way above seismic codes over and over and over, when that should just, probability should not be counted. We just see it's systematic. Every time you put an instrument near a fault in a big earthquake, you measure this. At one point, you just need to be comfortable with estimating the other part is, I would say, there's very clear basic principles that we get here. I mean, not 100% of the time. We start out with a very regular, well-thought architecturally and structurally. And I think that's the main step there, sort of the analysis, and then other things that help you. If you start on the right foot, it's going to help you. And then, of course, this things sort of stirrups and there. It's a big thing. They're just, one thing that I tell the students in class, and it's something that Professor Mateo used to say in class all the time. It's like, the ultimate inspection is whatever little thing you forgot in your drawing, your model, your construction, on the inspection, the Nazis will find out something bad. So we just try to do our best to minimize
Short columns seem to be reoccurring over and over again in lots of earthquakes. Are there some ways to mitigate them? Because they exist everywhere.
I'm glad you mentioned that, Maria. Sometimes I think about Santa Claus, and if I would write a letter to Santa Claus, I would ask two things. No self-stories and shortcomings. Just those two wishes would really save a life. But I think both of them could really be, solved. We've known about them for 60, 70 years at least, well documented, over and over. But somehow in our education process, there's something that is failing. I mean, it's like, it teaches how to add and get it, but this thing, somehow we don't get it. And it's tough. And it happens so, you look at photos, lots of shit. Yeah. Soft stories. Really see. Just close your eyes. Sometimes it's very tired.
I was wondering, you had a lot of photographs of mostly damaged structures. What fraction of the buildings you saw were actually damaged? And again, this was mostly urban cities, and I was wondering if you had a sense of how the rural areas responded.
Yeah, that's a great question. When I was your age, my first task as a graduate student, my advisor told me, was to analyze structures that did not damage. I thought, why does he want me to analyze them? There's all those that fail. Let's study some. But it's far more important to study those, because that's sort of the key for making the bad experience. And in the worst city, Pedernales, I would say that's really bad. I would say it was getting close to 45%, either collapsed or extremely damaged. In Manta, it was much probably not even 10%. I mean, that's the thing that media always does that. They tend to concentrate on the damage. It's always there's a lot of good stuff.
One more question. Do you know how they ended up evacuating people from the hospital when the emergency exits were all damaged? Like the people who were actually patients?
So there was another emergency exit on that particular hospital. So they were able to evacuate from that.
It seemed like throughout the presentation that a lot of wood frame buildings actually performed pretty well. Do you have any ideas of why that was the case?
I didn't used to do a lot of wood, but in recent years I've been working on that. So it was very interesting in that. And it was really puzzling because, we've learned that they're flexible, but part of that, allows them to survive in relatively safe structures. But they do rack quite a lot. And like that earth structure that they showed, it's like, essentially there's no tensile capacity. And say, please show me some evidence that there was an earthquake here. And the neighbors were reinforced concrete structures on the floor. So it's just puzzling. There's clearly less mass, but simple calculations, less mass still doesn't mean zero relative to space. So really puzzling. We documented lots of things. And as a matter of fact, in Puerto Viejo, we were walking, it was closed, the whole downtown area, they actually called it Ground Zero. And I was taking, zillion photos. And I took a few of this collapsed structure, and the neighboring was that yellow one that they showed. So there was this fellow that noted that I took like 20 photos of that structure. And as I'm walking out from Ground Zero, he asked, I noted you're taking a lot of photos of my house. Can you explain why it failed? And there was just that portion of the floor system that went through. It didn't say anything, but really, the reason why I was taking photos is why this one really collapsed. Earth structure, just rotten connections, terrible. Yet it's standing. I can't explain.
I don't know if you know much about the additional earthquake that occurred on May 18th.
Mhm.
I just was curious, I heard very little of whether there was additional damage or what kind of the significance happened.
There wasn't
Yeah.
damage.
Yeah, there was pretty strong aftershock, 7.1, and there were several collapsed buildings. And it's been, nowadays, actually a former PhD student of mine is doing a lot of research on this. Because previously, it's been documented before, and just what is the risk on structures. Actually, Professor Brunel had a project here with DWE. They were actually thinking about a new tagging system that would be sort of time dependent. And you would basically tag it differently depending on the date of the number of days after the earthquake. And often when I go after earthquakes, or now this kind of thing, it's close to the structures, and we're trying to be careful about this. But yeah, they're documented several structures.
So some of the structures, what's next with them? Do you tear them down, do you fix them up?
Actually, many of those, no. I was surprised, and they would ask us, so usually we don't get involved in those things. But for example, that hospital, the blue one that I showed, it's fine. If there's an earthquake here in California, and that's what happens to the structure, we would say, great. We designed them to do that, to be damaged. Just tiny bit. Maybe not a hospital, but if it was an office building, we would say, that's great. We don't use all 100%. It's just that when it comes to the monster, we're terrible. We're better here in the West. We're still visible. But our hospitals here actually have two of the experts. They take care of us. The hospitals here in California. It's a lot. You see our two new hospitals, the children's and the new. It's zillions of hours that go into thinking about every single bolt, every single ceiling, every single path of every single thing that will go into the hospital is checked. So it's brutal because they're very complex systems. And it just takes very few things to bring the hospital down. I didn't have a chance, but I'll give you an example. It could be a battery that just overturns, break the cables, and that powers the startup of an emergency power generation. So of course, there's no power in the grid after the earthquake. We have no power in the hospital. We have no hospital. We need to evacuate patients. And sometimes it's just really tiny detail. You have an MRI. You forgot to put two bolts, slice it, knocks against the floor, and that MRI that was supposed to take images from injured people on their heads after the earthquake. So it's super hard. I think that's sort of the ultimate frontier. We're attempting. We'll get there. It's going to take us some time. It's 6 o'clock. Yep.
I have two questions. One, you mentioned some artifacts at 3 seconds. Was possible instrument issues? Some artifacts of present instruments?
I don't know, because it was only 3 stations and many of the instruments are the same. So I think I was thinking the activity